Hi, this is Mike Nemeth, Marketing and Communications Director for the California Apartment Association. Welcome to today's vidcast, where we'll be reviewing some of the biggest stories in the most recent edition of CAA's electronic newsletter, the Rental Housing Report. And this newsletter is full of important news for California landlords, a lot of concerning news as well. The top story: bill would allow secret recordings of landlords to find fair housing violations. AB 1086 by Assemblyman Kevin McCarty out of Sacramento would allow certain individuals to pose as prospective tenants and secretly record conversations with landlords as they gather evidence into potential discriminatory housing practices. And these secret recordings would be conducted by an investigator or a tester for a qualified fair housing enforcement organization. So basically, these people would go undercover as tenants, hide their iPhone or Android in a pocketbook or in a coat pocket, something where the landlord won't see it, record a discussion trying to find some kind of fair housing violation. Now, under existing California law, landlords and other members of the public are protected from this kind of activity because California is a two-party consent state, and it's illegal to record a private conversation without the consent of all parties. So the activity that would be allowed under AB 1086 is highly concerning. It singles out landlords for these kinds of investigations with surreptitious recordings, and it goes against civil liberties enshrined in the state and federal constitutions. So this is a very concerning bill, and we'll be reporting on it as it works its way through the legislature. Let's move on to another story. An initial hearing has been set for legislation that would authorize California cities and counties to impose strict rent controls on single-family homes, condos, and apartments as soon as they turn 15 years old. This proposal, SB 466 by Senator Aisha Wahab out of Hayward, will go before the Senate Judiciary Committee on March 28th. That's a Tuesday. The legislation would dissolve some of the core elements of the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, which is California's most important rental housing protection law. Costa-Hawkins prohibits cities and counties from imposing local rent control ordinances to any type of housing built after 1995. And under Costa-Hawkins as well, local rent controls cannot apply to single-family homes, regardless of their age. So this would bring single-family homes into the fold for local strict rent control ordinances. On our website, we're asking our members to contact their senator and ask them to oppose this bill when it comes before them on Tuesday, March 28th. So be sure to check it out on our website, and please take part in this grassroots effort. Okay, next story. Extreme rent control and anti-housing activists have begun collecting signatures in hopes of qualifying a statewide ballot measure that would repeal Costa-Hawkins. So signature gatherers, bankrolled by anti-housing rent control activist Michael Weinstein and the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, hit the streets earlier this month after the Attorney General's office issued a title and summary for what's being called the Justice for Renters Act. The measure would overturn 1995's Costa-Hawkins, and that means not only allowing local rent controls on single-family homes and housing that's built after 1995, but it would also do away with something called vacancy decontrol. So if vacancy decontrol is done away with, I mean, cities and counties will once again be able to regulate rents between tenancies. At present, in a rent-controlled city, when a unit turns over, the landlord can raise the rents to market rate. So rent control is basically put on pause until a new tenant moves in, and then rent control kicks in again. With vacancy control, there is no pause. Rent control applies steadily without any break, and that takes away really the light at the end of the tunnel for landlords in rent-controlled cities who look forward to eventually being able to bring their units up to market. This would take that away and artificially keep rental units priced below market in perpetuity. Twice before, Michael Weinstein has succeeded in placing measures on the ballot to attack Costa-Hawkins. Those were Prop 10 and Prop 21. In both cases, CAA was able to defeat the propositions at the ballot box, but Weinstein is trying again. And this is going to be quite the battle coming up. So be sure to visit caanet.org for updates on this forthcoming proposition. Okay, now let's move on to more legislation. Like I said, lots of news at the Capitol. Under a newly introduced Assembly bill, California cities would no longer be able to force landlords to evict renters based on alleged actions at or near the property. The bill, AB 1418 by Assemblywoman Tina McKinnon out of Inglewood, targets the most stringent versions of crime-free housing policies that have been adopted by some California cities. Read more about this proposal at the CAA website. On to the next story. CAA publishes compliance documents for the new Just Cause law in Los Angeles. And in this case, Mallory Homewood, one of our attorneys, writes about the newly published materials to help landlords abide by the new Just Cause for eviction ordinance in LA. More regional news, this time from the East Bay. Fremont rent review ordinance to remain unchanged. CAA was successful in defeating some proposals that would have made the rent review ordinance more onerous in the city of Fremont. CAA and SFAA. SFAA is the San Francisco Apartment Association, one of our chapters. Together, the associations have asked the U.S. Supreme Court to review a property rights case. Read about that in our newsletter. And we've had lots of rain, as you know, lots of atmospheric rivers coming into California. And at this point, there are 43 counties in California that are listed under a state of emergency based on these severe winter storms. And when these kinds of emergencies are declared, it triggers a Penal Code Section 396, which is the state's anti-price gouging law. And when this happens, when this penal code is invoked, it caps price increases on many consumer goods and services, including that of rental housing, at 10% above pre-emergency levels. And this applies not only in the 43 counties named, but in other counties where there could be an increased demand for housing based on the emergency. Finally, we have a story reminding landlords that they cannot demand rent payments when a unit is uninhabitable. And we put together this story because of a breach on the Pajaro River on the Central Coast. This affects Monterey and Santa Cruz counties. And in this area, there was a government ordered evacuation. That means housing that's been evacuated is uninhabitable, and landlords cannot demand rent in those cases. Thanks for joining me today for a review of the news, and we'll see you again after the next edition.